All righty, welcome back. It is the Chico Borman Show. Continuing on this Friday, we just had a change of location. No big deal. We will have Bill Landis coming your way from Dotting the I's and the Rivals Network. Kind of put a cap on the Buckeyes season. Of course, not over. I kind of feel bad, Boom. Like, I feel like I'm writing the Buckeyes eulogy. There is still a path, and we've got pick six coming from Tipico later on in the show. There is still a path, I guess, that would have the Buckeyes getting. It starts tonight, actually. It starts tonight for Ohio State. They need Washington to beat Oregon, so hopefully that's going to happen. And then you obviously need some pretty big upsets. You need Texas to lose to Oklahoma State. I think that's the one. Of all the upsets, doesn't that feel like the one that they're not going to lose to Oak State, I don't think. But see, then, hasn't Texas always gone through that little, just when they think they're back and they think they've made it and they think they're where they need to be, and then all of a sudden, But I don't see that happening against Oklahoma State. Florida State and Louisville, looking for Louisville to knock off Florida State. I will say this about Oregon-Washington, which, by the way, is going to be a great game. Did you envision Washington being a 10-point underdog? I mean, I have no problem with Oregon being favored. Oregon should be favored in this game, but 10 points, wow. I mean, that seems like a lot. Seems like a lot.
Yeah, that's one where I imagine perhaps it might be on pick six, but I would pick Washington to cover that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Oregon can probably win, and I know you're like in love with Dan Lanning.
I do expect Oregon to win, but I think it's going to be closer than 10. That's a massive spread.
Here's what I think Michael Penix. I feel like Michael Penix is a guy that just he keeps getting doubted. And look, he hasn't been all world the last few weeks. I understand that. But it seems like whenever they need to, rally, whether it be late in the game, whether it's coming from him, whether it's coming from Dunze, that he's always there. I mean, he's always right in the heart of that. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a great game. Of all the championship games, that one is probably the one that you want to. I don't know, that or Alabama, Georgia. I don't feel like Alabama is going to do a whole hell of a lot against Georgia. And yeah, I know Jalen Milroe is very, very good. And certainly is not the quarterback that he was earlier in the season, but I don't know, not seeing it. So anyway, college football is in full force this weekend. Kind of weird though, 3 straight weeks or 3 straight years that we have not seen Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. Interesting.
Disappointing.
Yes, that's one word to describe it, Bohm. Yes, it would be. You could consider it disappointing.
I know we talked about it in the past, and I'm kind of dreading watching it. I want to see what happens. But it's so disappointing. I cannot believe that Ohio State finds themselves yet again missing out on another Big Ten championship, and all for this loss every year.
I mean, the three of them. We'll talk about this with Bill Landis from Rivals here in just a few moments, but I feel like of all the losses, this one you felt. I think we finally felt like we were in a good position. I think you felt like, okay, look, they fixed a lot of the things defensively that they needed to fix. The explosive plays were gone. I think a lot of it did come down to, and when you watch all those pregame shows and you watched all of the matchup shows leading into the game, what were they saying? Well, can Kyle McCord, and McCord didn't play terribly, and I got to watch my words, Bohm, because I know you love the kid. He didn't play poorly, but like that, oh, man. And Will Johnson, Will Johnson's one of the best DBs in the country. Will Johnson made a play. Michigan is a very good football team. I want to reiterate that. This is not a Michigan team like, the days of Rich Rod or Brady Hoke. Like this isn't that. So when we talk about Urban Streak and we talk about Tress and they're still incredible. Like this Michigan team right now is back. This is what Harbaugh does. Will he stick around? That remains to be seen. Who knows? But like this team this year, they're not number 2 for nothing. Could they win the national championship? Yes. It was just one of the things that you absolutely said couldn't happen, happened, and it happened early in that game to get the crowd really, really fired up, and it was a McCord interception.
Yeah, and to your point, I think overall his performance really was not awful by any circumstances, but you talked about it right there and all the time with the Browns, how the importance of playing clean football, taking care of it, and the Wolverines had no turnovers. Kyle McCord, overall, great game. 2 very, very bad mistakes. 2 critical, awful mistakes. And sadly, those 2 plays are what are going to resonate most, I think, with fans who are kind of grieving over this loss.
You think, we'll ask Bill this here in a moment, but do you think Kyle McCord is the starting quarterback next year?
I want to say yes.
I mean, there's a lot. You got the Washington State kid that's going to be entering the portal. Yeah, there's a couple that
I need to know if McCord can show growth. Going from season 1 to season 2, a lot of players do take a step forward. Just having that experience under your belt can go a long way, but not always.
I guess what I wonder is, like with C.J. Stroud, forget about what I think or you think or the fans think. C.J. Stroud, it felt like to me, had the confidence of Ryan Day. And I know I mentioned this earlier in the season, right, when they were going through the whole quarterback thing and you wouldn't hear Ryan Day necessarily just be effusive in his praise. And he said, neither guy's really come out and done it for us, and, we still don't have an answer. With CJ, like you just knew, even though the fans were ridiculous with him, you could hear in Ryan Day's voice, this kid's going to be fine. You didn't necessarily hear that for a while with Kyle McCord. Okay, without further ado, we bring him in. Bill Landis, our good buddy all season long, joining us from Rivals and Dotting the I's and the podcast. He joins us. So, all right, Bill, you are in charge of giving the eulogy for the Ohio State. It's not over yet, but well, yeah, it's all over. But what do they say? The saying, all that. Yeah, it's going to be awfully tough. They need Washington tonight to win. Before we get into all those scenarios, your biggest surprise from watching that game, the thing that you didn't expect to see from Ohio State that you did see from Ohio State?
That's a good question. I guess there are 2 things. Well, I thought they'd run the ball a little more explosively against Michigan. If you look at some of the advanced statistics, Ohio State actually kind of ran the ball better than Michigan did, just that Michigan ran it more, so it accumulated more yards. But Ohio State never really got a big run. I thought Travion Henderson was going to be good for a 40 or 50 yard touchdown run in this game, just because he kind of has been in every game Ohio State has played. And that didn't happen. He didn't have a run of more than 10 yards. Ohio State only had 1 of those runs in that game. It was a 12-yard run from Chip Trainum. So that was surprising. That went differently than I thought it would. And then we knew all year that Jim Knowles had kind of dialed back the aggression on defense, and then it had served Ohio State well throughout the season. But we all thought he was kind of holding something back, or maybe he would be a little more aggressive against Michigan. And I know that's a delicate balance, because being aggressive is kind of what got them beat against Michigan last year. So he was going to have to find the middle ground of what exactly that needed to look like. But then he only blitzed 4 times against Michigan, which is a crazy low number. So that was surprising too. I thought that they would have tried to get after J.J. McCarthy a little more, especially on that last possession when Michigan was running 7 minutes off the clock. It never really felt like Ohio State was trying to do anything to get Michigan behind the chains. So that was a little shocking to me.
Yeah, that was okay. That's the drive I wanted to go to when you talk about being aggressive, because last year it was, he was too aggressive, and it was kind of downright irresponsible as far as you left guys, nobody in coverage and things of that sort. But in that drive, you could even hear Joe Klatt say it like, man, I know that he is kind of stuck to his guns, but this is the big drive, and they've got to make a play. And Michigan didn't exactly run the ball down their throat, but when they needed it the most, it happened on that drive. And I guess that's the one where you thought, okay, if he's going to get aggressive, he's going to get aggressive here, and it just never really transpired.
No, it never did. And you're right. Michigan only averaged 4 yards per carry. It had, I think, 4 runs of 10 yards or more, but one of those was a scramble. One of those was a quarterback run when they brought in their backup to start the second half. Otherwise, I thought Ohio State did a really good job of making sure Michigan didn't run all over them, but it can be, effective in a different way, I guess, if a team is just churning out 3 and 4 yards every time they run the ball. It just sets up manageable third downs and fourth downs, which is what, Michigan went 3 for 3 on fourth down in that game. So it was odd. And Jim Knowles was trying to match personnel, right? He was putting an extra linebacker out there when Michigan would play with two tight ends, and that didn't always work great. And then on that last drive, it did seem like he got caught in between a couple times where they had their kind of base defense out there with only two linebackers, but Michigan had a lot of bigger guys out there, and they ran the ball a little better then. So it wasn't like an overall bad game from the defense, I don't think at all. They only gave up 3 touchdowns, and one of them came on a short field, but that last drive was really frustrating because it was clear that they were going to have to do something to try to get the ball back. And you don't know what happens. There's no guarantee of anything if you do, but to let Michigan run 7 minutes off the clock there was inexcusable.
Before we move on to the offensive side of the ball and some other things, one more thing on the defense. You mentioned the linebackers, and I thought all in all they played pretty well, but and you wrote about this in coverage. It seemed like they were just a step slow, for lack of a better way to say it. Do you think that's scheme? Do you think that's like what do you think the issue was there?
It's some combination, I think, of scheme and personnel. We saw it earlier in the year against Notre Dame, with Notre Dame's tight ends. And then I don't know if Ohio State really ended up playing a team between Notre Dame and Michigan that was capable of exploiting that in quite the same way. But I think it's a little bit of predictability with scheme, just kind of spot dropping zone coverage rather than doing any kind of like matching or stuff like that. So you end up with guys just kind of covering green space instead of covering receivers. But then I also don't know that Ohio State's linebackers, just skill set wise, were ever quite comfortable operating in space like that. And that was clear, I think, against Michigan. It was certainly clear earlier in the year against Notre Dame. So that wasn't surprising to me to see it kind of come rearing back as an issue for the defense because it kind of had been an underlying thing all year. But it was definitely probably the area where Michigan was most effective.
All right. One thing that I think was surprising, and again, we're talking to Bill Landis with rivals and dotting the I's. We thought, especially after that Georgia game last year, and Ryan Day said himself, like, I'm never going to coach like last year against Michigan again. I'm going to be aggressive. It seemed like he was kind of apprehensive a little bit. Certainly that, towards the end of the first half, the field goal, the time winds down. Did he kind of resort back to that, not being aggressive enough mentality as far as coaching in this game?
I think so. I didn't like the punt. It was 4th and 1, I think, from Ohio State's own 46 in the first quarter. So you're right around midfield. And they just punted it away. It wasn't a great punt either. They didn't really flip the field all that well. I thought that was an early indication that Ryan Day was probably going to play it a little more conservatively. And then obviously, like you mentioned, the field goal at the end of the first half. I still don't understand the thought process there. Um, I get that they only had one timeout, and it was kind of a weird juncture, but I would much rather go for it on fourth down there, at the very least try to set up a more manageable field goal than throw at a kicker who's never made a 50-yard field goal in a game for a 52-yard field goal in that moment, especially when you did have like 40 seconds to work with by the time the third down play ended, and you had a timeout if you wanted to talk it over. So I thought that was terrible game management. I thought it sent the wrong message to Ryan Day's team. I guess I would give the players credit for kind of rebounding from it because I thought they came out and obviously played well in the first few drives of the second half. And I actually thought, aside from those two kind of situational moments, that Ryan Day did call a pretty good game. I thought the passing attack was effective aside from the turnovers. And like I said, they didn't run the ball terribly. They just didn't run it explosively. So I thought, like, coming out of the game last year, there was no doubt in my mind that like Ryan Day just had to give up play calling because I kind of thought he had like lost his touch with that a little bit. I didn't think that in this game. I just thought he handled the situations poorly and coached it tight, and then maybe his team played a little tight because of that, but I don't really think Ohio State was playing all that tight in this game.
And I think what makes it worse, Bill, is because I agree with you. I don't think it was egregious by any means. I mean, the call at the end of the half. The biggest thing for me on that was time's ticking off the clock, and
Mhm.
you're just like, I mean, to me, it was pretty clear. Like he was still wrestling with what to do, and you would think in that situation, you know what you're going to do, whether fans agree with it or disagree with it. But then on the flip side of it, and this is where it kind of the stark contrast. Here's Sharon Moore, who
Mhm.
and we talked about this last week, where he's got a lot on his plate. Obviously, he's Jim Harbaugh is telling him that make sure that you're engaging the refs and make sure you're doing all of that. But this guy was ready for every call. I mean, he was decisive. He didn't seem to be overwhelmed by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not that Ryan looked so poorly in the whole game, but it's just Sharon Moore, who is the interim coach while Harbaugh's out, just really, really looked like he knew what he wanted to do and executed it.
Yeah, they had a great game plan. I thought that was going to be an area where Ohio State would have an advantage, just Ryan Day's experience compared to Sharon Moore's, and I think that ended up not being the case. Now, I guess to be fair, the 3 times that Michigan did go for it on 4th down, they were in plus territory. One of them was on the 1-yard line. Like, of course, you're going to go for that. And if Ryan Day were in similar situations, maybe he would have also gone for it on those 4th downs. But I don't. I think if Sherrod Moore was faced with the 4th and 1 early from Michigan's own 46-yard line, he wouldn't have punted. He would have went for it because I think he had an understanding that aggressiveness is important in this game. Playing for touchdowns is important in this game, and I think empowering your players to go be playmakers is important in this game. And it's not that Ryan Day didn't do that, or missed the opportunity to do that at every turn, but I did